They thought I was just a confused old man, easy to manipulate, easy to erase. When my daughter stood in that courtroom and declared, "You were nothing without Mom's family money," I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. But what they never suspected was that for 20 years, every conversation, every secret meeting, every forged signature had been recorded. After my wife died, they moved into my house claiming it was to protect me. Then my name disappeared from accounts. My granddaughter started calling me the old man in the bedroom. I endured it all silently, watching as they systematically dismantled the life Martha and I had built together. But sometimes, the person they think is the weakest turns out to be the one they should have feared the most. This is the story of how an obsolete security system, a forgotten basement, and an unlikely teenage ally helped me expose a 20-year embezzlement scheme orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. A story about what happens when family betrayal meets cold hard evidence. If this story resonated with you, please follow our channel for more powerful true stories that will leave you thinking long after they end. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more stories like Howard's to light. I didn't cry at my wife's funeral, not because it didn't hurt. It hurt so much it numbed me. But I did cry in that courtroom years later when my daughter shouted for everyone to hear, "You were nothing without Mom's family money." And that's how, with eyes dry from contempt, she signed the divorce papers and erased me from her life. In that moment, while everyone looked at me with pity, I relived it all. The day they moved into my house claiming it was to take care of me. The day they removed my name from the accounts. The day my granddaughter stopped calling me Grandpa and started calling me the old man in the bedroom. I endured it silently. What they didn't know was that for 20 years, every meeting, every conversation, every transfer had been recorded. I can still feel the weight of their stares in that courtroom, the whispers, the judge shifting uncomfortably as Rachel, my own flesh and blood, stood there dismantling my entire existence with a single sentence. Funny how 67 years of life can be reduced to a financial transaction in your child's eyes. "Your Honor," she said with that calculated softness she'd perfected, "my father has been financially dependent on my mother's family wealth his entire life. He never built anything of his own." Then she glanced at me with something worse than hatred, indifference, as if I were a stranger who had overstayed his welcome in her narrative. My son-in-law Cole stood beside her, his hand possessively on her shoulder, nodding along like I hadn't taught him how to tie a fishing hook when he first came into our lives, like I hadn't co-signed the loan for their first house, like I hadn't held their daughter through nights of fever when they were too busy at those mysterious business meetings. The divorce wasn't even mine. It was hers from Cole, yet somehow I had become central to their proceedings, a scapegoat for financial disputes that supposedly stretched back decades. The courtroom felt smaller with each accusation. I clutched my walking cane tighter, my knuckles white. "We've had to support him entirely since Mom died," Rachel continued, her voice breaking at precisely the right moment for sympathy. "The dementia is getting worse. He imagines things, creates conspiracy theories about us." Dementia, the word they'd been planting around town for months. The word they'd whispered to my doctors, my neighbors, even to little Maddie. The perfect cover for anything I might say in my defense. I wanted to stand up, to roar back with the truth. But something stopped me. A lifetime of swallowing pride, of believing family conflicts should stay behind closed doors. Martha, my late wife, always said dignity was the last thing they could take from you. So I sat there, letting the tears finally come after 3 years of drought. On the drive home, nobody spoke. Cole drove while Rachel stared out the window, probably already calculating how to accelerate my fade into obscurity. I watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by. The park where I used to push Maddie on the swings. The community center where Martha and I taught dance lessons every Thursday for 20 years. They'd already taken me out of those stories too. The moment we got home, I headed straight for the basement. My knees ached from the courthouse's hard benches, but my heart was heavier. I reached for the control panel of the old security system, the one I installed when Martha got sick, and I began to suspect there were too many visits and too little affection. Everything was there, including things I hadn't expected to find, including secrets that even I didn't fully understand yet. The system had been my insurance policy. Martha was the one who insisted on it, actually. Howard, she'd said during one of her lucid moments before the cancer took her mind. Something doesn't add up with the accounts. The statements look different. She was always sharper than me with numbers. But by then, Rachel had already taken over as her caretaker, limiting my time alone with my wife. I powered up the old monitor hidden behind the furnace, covered by what looked like storage boxes. The security company had gone out of business years ago, but the local system still worked, capturing to the dedicated hard drives I'd installed. 20 years of footage, evidence of slow, calculated erosion of an old man's life. What I saw in those first few videos made my hands shake. There was Rachel just 3 days after the funeral in Martha's study, photographing documents with her phone. There was Cole, prying open the locked drawer of my desk with a screwdriver. And there, most damning of all, was my own signature, practiced and forged on papers I never saw. I ejected a small flash drive from the computer and slipped it into my pocket. Then I heard the basement door creak open. "Dad? What are you doing down there in the dark?" Rachel called down, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "You know the doctor said you shouldn't be on those stairs alone." I turned off the monitor and composed myself. "Just looking for your mother's old recipes," I lied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Thought I might try cooking again." Her laugh was dismissive as she closed the door without coming down. "We have a meal service now, remember? No need for you to worry about that. No need for me to do anything, apparently, except quietly disappear." That night, alone in what had become essentially my prison cell, the small bedroom they'd prepared for me when they took over the master suite, I made a decision. The kind that changes everything but looks like nothing from the outside. I would become the ghost they already treated me as. I would watch. I would record. And when the time was right, I would show them exactly who was nothing without whom. After Martha died, our house felt like an echo chamber. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me she wasn't there to complain about them anymore. Every morning, I'd set 2 coffee mugs on the counter out of habit, only to put one back with hands that trembled more from grief than age. 67 years old, and suddenly I felt ancient. That's when Rachel and Cole showed up with suitcases and sympathetic smiles. "Dad, we've been talking," she said, settling into Martha's favorite armchair without asking. "It's dangerous for someone your age to live alone." I remember looking at them, my daughter with her mother's eyes but none of her warmth, and Cole in his crisp button-down that probably cost more than my first car, and feeling something between gratitude and unease. "I've been alone before," I said, though the truth was I hadn't been truly alone since 1978 when Martha walked into that hardware store where I worked and asked for paint samples she didn't need. Cole cleared his throat in that practiced way of his. "Howard, statistics show elderly people living alone are at significant risk. Falls, burglaries, medical emergencies." He had a way of talking about me like I wasn't in the room, like I was already a case study rather than a father-in-law. That first week they were attentive in a way that felt almost suffocating. Rachel brought me coffee in bed. Too sweet, unlike how Martha knew I liked it. Cole installed handrails in the bathroom. "Safety first," he'd say with that corporate smile that never quite reached his eyes. They invited me to dinner each night, asking me to tell stories about Martha that made them exchange glances I couldn't quite interpret. By the second week, the questions started. Casual at first. "Dad, where do you keep the property deeds just so we know in case of emergency?" "Your financial advisor called." "What's his number again? We should probably have a family meeting with him." "Mom's jewelry, is it insured? Maybe we should put it in a safe deposit box." I gave them answers because that's what fathers do. We provide. We trust. We believe our children when they say it's for protection. It was a Tuesday morning, about 3 months after they'd moved in, when Rachel sat across from me at breakfast with a stack of papers. "Just some account adjustments," she said, sliding them toward me with a pen. "The bank recommended putting everything in a family trust, for tax purposes." Her eyes never quite met mine. "It's all standard procedure." I hesitated, my reading glasses somewhere upstairs. "Shouldn't I review these first?" Cole appeared then, as if summoned. "Howard, Rachel spent hours with the financial advisor getting this sorted. It's exactly what Martha would have wanted, keeping the family secure." He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Besides, aren't you always saying how you hate paperwork?" I signed. Not all at once. Some that morning, others over the following days, each time with vague explanations that seemed reasonable when wrapped in phrases like estate planning and liability protection, each time with slightly less explanation than before. A month later, my credit card was declined at Anderson's pharmacy where I'd been filling prescriptions for 20 years. Joe Anderson himself called Rachel instead of me. Simple mistake, she assured me later. We've consolidated the accounts for simplicity. Here's a new card. It's connected to our family account so we can track expenses better. The card had a $200 limit. That same week, Cole renovated my home office. I came back from my doctor's appointment to find the room transformed. My decades of files gone, the bookshelves rearranged, my desk replaced with a smaller one. "Where are my papers?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "All digitized," Cole beamed, showing me a thumb drive. "Welcome to the 21st century, Howard. And we've cleared out all that clutter. The doctor said reducing stress is important for someone with your blood pressure." I nodded and thanked him because that's what was expected. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the too perfect explanations, the constant references to my health, the way my world was shrinking room by room, decision by decision. It was around this time that little Maddie, my granddaughter, stopped coming to my room for our evening chess games. She was 9 then, bright as a new penny with Martha's laugh. When I asked her why, she looked at her shoes. "Mom says you like to keep old things too much," she mumbled. "She says I shouldn't bother you because you need rest." The next day I overheard Maddie in the kitchen. "Why does the old man in the bedroom keep calling me for games?" My heart cracked along a fault line that had been forming since the funeral. Not Grandpa anymore. The old man. That evening, I went to the basement under the pretense of looking for an old photo album. In reality, I checked the security system I'd installed years before, back when Martha first got sick, and I noticed certain papers missing, certain visitors coming only when I was out. The system was outdated but functional, recording to hard drives hidden behind panels that looked like electrical boxes. What I didn't know then, what would only become clear much later, was that Rachel had been meeting secretly with my brother-in-law, Vernon, Martha's younger brother who had always resented how his sister's portion of the family business had come to me after their parents died. I didn't know about the false power of attorney, but deep down, I felt something was wrong. I left the system running, silent, watchful, my only ally in a house that was once my sanctuary and now felt increasingly like a well-furnished trap. "It's all to protect you, Dad," Rachel would say whenever I questioned anything. Her voice was always patient, always slightly condescending, as if explaining simple concepts to a child. "You know how Mom worried about you managing alone." But Martha had never worried about that. In fact, in her final weeks, she'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "Howard, promise me you'll watch Rachel carefully with the money. Something's changed in her." I should have listened sooner. I should have seen the signs. But grief has a way of blinding you, especially when the people taking advantage are the very ones you'd give your life to protect. The decision I made that day was as silent as the falling snow outside my bedroom window, but it changed everything. I remember standing there watching the flakes drift down, coating the bird feeder Martha had insisted on placing, where you can see it from your favorite chair, Howard. My breath fogged the glass as I came to a resolution. I would document everything. My hands shook, not from fear but from a cold determination I hadn't felt since my days in Vietnam. Back then, I'd learned that survival sometimes meant becoming invisible while seeing everything. I would become a ghost in my own home again. That afternoon, while Rachel and Cole took Maddie to her piano recital, I descended to the basement with purpose. The old security monitoring system hummed in its hidden compartment behind what appeared to be storage boxes filled with Christmas decorations, things they'd never touch because sorting through Dad's junk wasn't on their priority list. I copied the security camera footage onto a small flash drive I'd purchased at the drugstore during my last approved solo outing. The young cashier had raised an eyebrow at me, an old man buying electronics, but rang me up without comment. Small mercies. The system wasn't sophisticated by modern standards, but Martha had insisted on getting one with substantial storage capacity when we installed it. "Better safe than sorry," she'd said with that intuition that always made me wonder if she somehow knew what was coming. 6 cameras, strategically placed throughout the house, had been silently recording on a loop for years. I labeled the flash drive heart medication and slipped it into my pill organizer, the one thing in the house Rachel and Cole never touched, probably fearing they'd have to take me to the ER if they messed up my medications. Their neglect became my protection. That night, I reviewed some of the footage on my old laptop, which they considered too obsolete to bother monitoring. What I saw made my stomach turn. Cole in my office, photographing documents from my filing cabinet. Rachel on the phone with someone saying, "He doesn't suspect anything." "No, Vernon, he's completely in the dark." Vernon, my brother-in-law, Martha's younger brother who had contested their parents' will years ago, arguing that the family business shares shouldn't pass to me upon Martha's death. The pieces were starting to connect, forming a picture I wasn't yet ready to fully comprehend. Days passed, each one bringing new revelations through my secret surveillance. I began tracking patterns. The hushed phone calls Rachel made from the garden, the visitors who came when they thought I was napping, the mail they intercepted before I could see it. I was so engrossed in this clandestine project that I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard a soft voice behind me in the basement one afternoon. "What are you hiding?" I spun around, clutching the flash drive to my chest, to find Abby standing at the foot of the stairs. At 14, she was all long limbs and watchful eyes, her dark hair falling over one shoulder. Unlike Maddie, who was Rachel and Cole's biological daughter, Abby was Cole's daughter from his first marriage, a quiet, observant child who seemed to exist on the periphery of their perfect family portrait. "Nothing," I lied instinctively, feeling the weight of months of secrecy. Abby's eyes flicked to the flash drive in my hand, then to the hidden monitoring setup I'd failed to fully conceal in my surprise. "They make you out to be a fool, don't they?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something in her tone, not accusation but understanding, made me pause. "What do you mean?" She took a step closer, glancing nervously up the stairs. "I've heard them. Late at night when they think everyone's asleep." Her voice trembled slightly. "Dad and Rachel, they talk about you like you're already gone. About what they'll do with the house, the money." She swallowed hard. "About how they'll have power of attorney soon." It was the first time in months that someone in that house had looked at me, really looked at me, and seen a person, not an inconvenience with an expiration date. In that moment, Abby became the first ally in what I was beginning to understand would be a long, silent war. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer from the way Cole sometimes spoke to her, dismissing her opinions, treating her as an afterthought from a previous chapter of his life. "Because," she said with a wisdom beyond her years, "I know what it's like when no one believes you." That afternoon marked the beginning of an unlikely alliance. Abby didn't ask for details about what I was doing, and I didn't volunteer them explicitly. Plausible deniability, I told myself, to protect her. But she began creating distractions when I needed to check the cameras. She would, accidentally, spill something when Rachel was about to enter a room where I was reviewing footage. She became my lookout, my silent guardian. She also became my eyes and ears in places my cameras couldn't reach. "They met with someone from Meridian Bank yesterday," she'd whisper while helping me sort laundry, the one chore Rachel still allowed me to do, probably because she considered it beneath her. "A man in an expensive suit. They had papers with your name on them." One evening, while organizing an old box in the basement, my pretext for checking the security footage, I heard those now familiar soft footsteps on the stairs. Abby appeared, her face more serious than usual. "I saw something," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. "Last night, through the window." She described watching Rachel and my brother-in-law Vernon standing in the garden, signing papers by the light of Vernon's phone. "I recorded it," she added, pulling out her phone to show me a shaky but clear video of the two of them, heads bent together over documents I couldn't quite make out. Why would they meet outside? At night? I wondered aloud. Abby's expression was grim beyond her years. Because whatever they're doing, they don't want it happening inside where it might be recorded. The irony of her statement might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so dire. They had no idea that their careful planning had one critical flaw. They thought they were dealing with a doddering old fool, not a man who had learned long ago that the best defense is to let your enemies underestimate you. What Abby had recorded, what she had risked her fragile position in the household to document, didn't yet make complete sense to me. But it was another piece in the puzzle, another bit of evidence for the growing file I kept hidden in my heart medication case. As Abby turned to go back upstairs, she paused. "They don't know," she said softly, "that I see you, really see you." Her eyes, so much older than her 14 years, held mine. "Don't give up, Grandpa Howard, please." It was the first time anyone in that house had called me Grandpa in months, and in that moment I made another silent promise. Whatever happened, I would protect this child who had become my unexpected ally behind enemy lines. One morning in late October, I sat at the breakfast table, pretending to focus on the crossword puzzle while Rachel and Cole discussed their day ahead in hushed tones. I'd become adept at appearing oblivious, a skill that seemed to come naturally with age, as people increasingly assumed I couldn't hear or comprehend what was happening around me. "I'm heading to the foundation meeting at 11, Rachel said, stirring her coffee precisely 3 times as she always did, a habit inherited from Martha, though lacking her mother's warmth. "Then I need to stop by Moore's office to finalize those transfer documents." Cole nodded, barely looking up from his tablet. "Good. The sooner we get the company shares moved, the better. Has Vernon confirmed the buyer's final offer?" I kept my expression neutral, though my heart raced. The company, Martha's family business, Westlake Textiles, had been passed down through 3 generations before landing partially in my wife's hands. After our marriage, her parents had reluctantly included me on the board, though I'd always remained in the background, letting Martha's business acumen lead the way. After her death, I'd assumed the shares would be managed according to her will, with Rachel eventually taking over, but respecting the structure Martha had created. "Dad," Rachel said suddenly, making me realize I'd been staring too long at the same crossword clue. "You look tired. Did you take your medication this morning?" I nodded, folding the newspaper carefully. "I was just thinking about your mother's company. Have there been any board meetings lately? I don't recall getting any notices." The look that passed between them was quick but unmistakable, alarm followed by practiced concern. "Oh, Dad," Rachel's voice took on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "We already resolved all that, remember? The doctors said these memory lapses might happen." She patted my hand as if I were a child. "We discussed the company situation months ago. You agreed it was best for us to handle everything while you focus on your health." I hadn't agreed to anything of the sort, but I nodded slowly, playing into their narrative. Of course, silly me. Later that afternoon, while they were both out, I made my way to my old office, now Cole's sleek workspace with none of the personal touches that had once made it mine. Using the spare key I'd kept hidden in the spine of an old dictionary in the hallway bookcase, I let myself in and gently closed the door behind me. The camera in the corner of the ceiling, installed years ago during the security system upgrade and forgotten by everyone except me, would capture what I was about to do, adding to my growing evidence file. I scanned the immaculate desk, noting how everything was arranged at perfect right angles, so unlike my organized chaos that Martha had lovingly teased me about. The computer was password protected, of course, but I wasn't after digital files today. I needed paper proof. The file cabinet yielded nothing useful. It had been purged of anything important months ago. But I knew Cole, meticulous to a fault, but ultimately predictable. He would keep essential documents close. I turned my attention to the credenza behind his desk. The bottom drawer was locked, but the thin metal yielded easily to the letter opener I'd brought with me, a silver one Martha had given me on our 25th anniversary. Inside lay several folders, neatly labeled. I quickly photographed them with the small digital camera Abby had slipped me last week, her old one that Rachel had replaced, deeming it obsolete, despite being perfectly functional. What I found made my blood run cold. Transfer documentation for Westlake Textiles shares, my shares according to these papers, to a holding company called Meridian Ventures. My signature appeared on several pages, but they weren't my signatures. The forgeries were good, close enough to fool a casual observer, but Martha had always teased me about my distinctive way of crossing my T's. Like little swords, she'd said. These forgeries missed that detail. I photographed every page, my hands trembling not with age but with anger. This was more than financial manipulation. This was theft, plain and simple. But the most damning document was buried at the bottom. A letter confirming the purchase of controlling interest in Westlake Textiles by Ravenwood Capital, a private equity firm owned by none other than Victor Brandt, my niece Jennifer's husband, Vernon's son-in-law. The family connection explained everything. This wasn't just opportunistic elder abuse. This was a coordinated plan to keep Westlake Textiles in the family, just not my branch of it. Vernon had finally found a way to undo what he'd considered the grave injustice of his parents leaving their business legacy in Martha's hands, and by extension, mine. I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it and slipped out, locking the door behind me. Back in my room, I downloaded the photos onto my hidden flash drive and made a second copy, just in case. The evidence was mounting, but I still didn't understand the full scope of their plan. The next day, I decided to take a calculated risk. During breakfast, I casually mentioned, I was thinking about visiting the bank today, just to review my accounts, make sure everything's in order. Rachel's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Why would you need to do that? We've gone digital with all the statements, remember? To reduce paper clutter. Just for peace of mind, I said, giving her my best harmless old man smile. It's been almost a year since Martha passed. Thought I should check in. Cole interjected smoothly. I'll drive you next week when things calm down at work. No need to bother with bus schedules. But I had already arranged for a taxi, calling from the landline in the basement that they'd forgotten existed. Actually, I've already called a cab. Should be here in 15 minutes. I enjoyed the flash of panic that crossed their faces before they could compose themselves. Dad, that's not necessary, Rachel said, her voice tight. We can handle this for you. I know you can, sweetheart, I replied, standing up with deliberate slowness. But some fresh air will do me good. They couldn't stop me without revealing their hand, so Rachel quickly volunteered to accompany me, claiming she had errands nearby. I accepted, knowing this was part of the game now. At Fidelity National Bank, where Martha and I had been customers for over 40 years, I asked to speak with our personal banker, Eleanor Simmons. The gray-haired woman greeted me warmly, though her eyes registered surprise at seeing Rachel hovering at my side. I'd like a complete statement of all my accounts, I said, presenting my ID. Eleanor hesitated, glancing between Rachel and me. Mr. Collins, there's a note on your account. She lowered her voice. Access is restricted by a family clause. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. What family clause? Eleanor looked uncomfortable. The limited power of attorney filed last month. All account access requires dual authorization now. She looked at Rachel. Your daughter's signature is needed for any information release. I could feel Rachel's smug satisfaction radiating beside me. It's for his protection, she told Eleanor with practiced concern. The doctors recommended it after his last episode. There had been no episode. No doctors had recommended any such thing. But I nodded along, playing my part while filing away this new information. The web they'd woven was tighter than I'd imagined, extending beyond our household into every facet of my financial existence. As we left the bank, I felt the weight of understanding settle more fully on my shoulders. Had I signed that power of attorney without realizing it? Or was that forged too, like the company transfer documents? Either way, the truth was clear. I had become a prisoner in a cage built of legal documents and false concern, my own daughter the chief architect of my confinement. The week after our bank visit, the atmosphere in the house changed. Subtle shifts occurred. Rachel checking my room more frequently, Cole installing a new security app on my phone that I suspected was tracking my movements. They were worried. Good. Let them worry. Let them wonder what I knew. I was sitting in the living room one evening, pretending to doze in Martha's old armchair while actually listening to Rachel and Cole arguing in hushed tones in the kitchen. Their voices carried through the heating vent, another oversight in their careful monitoring of me. He's asking questions about the company, Rachel hissed. And that bank visit wasn't a coincidence. Something's off. Cole's voice was dismissive. He's an old man with declining faculties. What's he going to do? We have power of attorney. We have the transfer documents. Everything's legal. Legal doesn't mean he can't cause problems, Rachel countered. If he starts talking to the right people, who's going to believe him over us? Cole interrupted. We've laid the groundwork for months. Everyone from his doctor to the neighbors thinks he's slipping. It's our word against his, and we have the paperwork to back it up. Their cold calculation made my stomach turn. My own daughter, planning my social death with the precision of a military operation. I wondered when exactly I had lost her, or if I'd ever truly had her at all. Martha had warned me for years that Rachel had a hardness to her that worried her mother. She sees people as stepping stones, Martha had said once. I'd defended Rachel then, calling it ambition. Now I recognized it as something darker. My contemplation was interrupted by the soft padding of feet on the carpet beside me. Abby stood there, her thin frame silhouetted against the hallway light, a finger pressed to her lips. Without a word, she slipped a folded note into my hand, then pretended to adjust the throw blanket over my legs as Rachel walked into the room. Abby? What are you doing? Rachel's voice was sharp with suspicion. Grandpa Howard looked cold. Abby said, her voice innocent. I was just fixing his blanket. Rachel's eyes narrowed. He's not actually your grandfather, you know. And he doesn't need your help. Go finish your homework. I feigned waking up, blinking in confusion to sell the performance. Is it time for my medication? I asked, playing into their narrative of my dependence. Rachel's demeanor shifted instantly to performative care. Yes, Dad. I'll get your pills. As she left for the kitchen, she gave Abby a pointed look. Homework, now. Later, alone in my room, I carefully unfolded Abby's note. Written in neat, small handwriting were the words, "They took my phone. They think I'm spying for you. Be careful. Don't give up." At the bottom was a hastily drawn heart. The next morning, I noticed Abby's absence at breakfast. When I asked about her, Cole answered curtly, "She's going through a rebellious phase. We've restricted her privileges until her attitude improves." I nodded, feigning disinterest. But my concern for the girl grew. She had become my only ally in this house of lies, and now she was suffering for it. I caught glimpses of her over the next few days, shuffling from her room to the bathroom, eyes downcast, her usual spark dimmed. Once I saw her watching me from the top of the stairs, and I gave her the slightest nod. The ghost of a smile touched her lips before she disappeared down the hallway. That evening, I heard raised voices from the garage. My aging legs protested as I made my way slowly toward the sound, careful to stay out of sight. Through the kitchen window that overlooked the attached garage, I saw Cole towering over Abby, his face contorted with anger. "We know you've been helping him," he shouted, waving what looked like a small notebook in her face. "Spying for the old man? Taking notes on our conversations? What did you think you were doing?" Abby stood her ground, her thin shoulders squared despite the tears streaming down her face. "You're stealing from him," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Everything you and Rachel are doing is wrong." Cole's laugh was ugly. "Wrong? You don't know anything about family obligations or business. Howard had no right to any of it in the first place. That company belonged to Rachel's grandparents, not some shop clerk they took pity on when their daughter made a bad choice." The words stung, even from a distance. Was that how they saw my marriage to Martha? A bad choice she had made? Marrying beneath her station? I thought of our 42 years together, the business we had helped grow together despite her family's initial disapproval. Martha had always told me she was proud of what we built, not just the company, but our life. "He loves you," Abby was saying now, her voice rising. "He loves all of you, and this is how you treat him? Like he's nothing? Like he doesn't matter?" Cole grabbed her arm and I felt my blood boil. "Shut up. You're just like your mother, always thinking you know better than everyone else. That's why she's alone, and that's why you'll end up with nothing if you don't learn your place." I wanted to intervene to protect her, but I knew any confrontation would only make things worse for both of us. I was still gathering evidence, still putting together the pieces. I couldn't reveal my hand yet. That night, unable to sleep, I made a difficult decision. I retrieved my hidden flash drive from the pill case and carefully created a comprehensive dossier of everything I had collected so far. The camera footage of Rachel and Cole removing documents from my office, the forged signatures, the secret meetings with Vernon, the conversations about managing me. I included dates, times, and as many details as I could remember. The moral weight of my choice was crushing. By documenting everything, I was admitting that I might need to take legal action against my own daughter. The thought made me physically ill. But what alternative did I have? They were systematically erasing me, stealing what Martha and I had built together. And now they were mistreating Abby for showing me basic human kindness. Early the next morning, while the house was still quiet, I slipped a brief note under Abby's door. "Stay strong. Help is coming. Destroy this." It wasn't much, but I hoped it would give her the courage to endure a little longer. Later that day, as I sat on the back porch watching birds at Martha's feeder, Abby appeared with a glass of water and my afternoon medications, a task Rachel usually handled with obvious resentment. "Rachel asked me to bring these," she said loudly enough for anyone listening to hear. But as she handed me the glass, she pressed something small and cool into my palm underneath it, a tiny memory card. That night, when the house was finally still, I examined her gift. It was a micro SD card from her confiscated phone. With trembling fingers, I inserted it into my old laptop's adapter and found a single video file. The recording showed Rachel and Cole in the garden at dusk. their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones as they huddled with Vernon over documents. Their words came through with crystal clarity. "Once we have the remaining shares transferred, we'll dissolve the old company structure," Vernon was saying. "Howard will never know that the testamentary trust Martha set up for him has been completely drained." Rachel laughed, a sound so devoid of warmth it was barely recognizable as human. "He'll die without ever knowing that the will isn't even his anymore." The moral burden I'd been carrying suddenly lightened. This wasn't just about money or control. They were actively working to dismantle everything Martha had intended for me, for us, for our legacy. My hesitation evaporated, replaced by a cold clarity. I copied the video to my flash drive, then carefully returned the SD card to its hiding place. The pieces were finally coming together. I now had enough evidence to act, to fight back against the elaborate fraud being perpetrated by my own family. But first, I needed to protect Abby. Whatever came next would be ugly, and she had risked too much already to help an old man reclaim what was rightfully his. 2 weeks passed with excruciating slowness. I maintained my role as the declining old man while secretly preparing for what I knew would be the only chance I might get. Every evening I reviewed my evidence, organizing it meticulously. Martha would have been proud of my attention to detail. She always said I was delightfully scattered, except when it really mattered. The opportunity arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning when Rachel burst into my room without knocking, something that had become her habit. Another reminder that I no longer deserved privacy in her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice falsely bright, "I need you to come with me to court today." I looked up from the book I'd been pretending to read, careful to keep my expression neutral despite the surge of adrenaline her words triggered. "Court? What for?" She sat on the edge of my bed, smoothing her immaculate charcoal pencil skirt. "It's my divorce hearing. Final proceedings." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I could really use my father's support today. I almost laughed at the irony. Rachel suddenly needing her father after months of systematic erasure. But I kept my face appropriately solemn. "Of course. Let me get dressed properly." As she left the room, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. They had unwittingly handed me the perfect stage for my counterattack. A courtroom, with legal witnesses, court reporters, and most importantly, a judge, was exactly what I needed. I dressed with deliberate care in my best suit. The navy one Martha had always said brought out my eyes. I polished my old leather shoes until they gleamed and selected the tie Martha had given me on our last anniversary. Deep burgundy with subtle gold accents. If this was to be my moment of reckoning, I would face it with dignity. Most importantly, I tucked my flash drive securely into my inner jacket pocket, alongside a small envelope containing a letter I'd written to Abby, just in case things didn't go as planned. The courthouse was an imposing limestone building in downtown Bedford Falls, its granite steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps seeking justice. I climbed them slowly beside Rachel, who kept a performatively supportive hand under my elbow. Cole was already inside, his sleek figure pacing the corridor outside courtroom B. "You're late," he hissed at Rachel, barely acknowledging my presence. "Dad was moving slowly this morning," she replied as if I weren't standing right there. "It doesn't matter. Judge Harmon always starts 15 minutes behind anyway." Inside the courtroom, the polished wood and solemn atmosphere momentarily transported me back to my youth, when I'd served as a character witness for a friend accused of theft. I'd told the truth then, just as I intended to now. Rachel directed me to a seat in the gallery while she and Cole moved to the front with their respective attorneys. I recognized Cole's lawyer as Bradley Thompson, who had also handled some of Martha's family's legal affairs over the years. Rachel's attorney was unfamiliar to me, a sharp-featured woman with expertly highlighted hair and an air of efficient ruthlessness. The proceedings began with standard formalities. I listened attentively as Judge Harmon, a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, called the case number and verified that both parties were present. "We're here to finalize the dissolution of marriage between Rachel Collins and Cole Bennett," she stated, reviewing the papers before her. "I understand the parties have reached an agreement regarding property division?" Rachel's attorney rose smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. We've prepared the necessary documentation outlining the equitable distribution of assets." The judge flipped through the papers handed to her, frowning slightly. "I see substantial financial holdings here. Miss Winters, can you clarify the source of these assets? There seems to be a significant disparity between the declared income and the portfolio value. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Rachel shifted uncomfortably before responding. Your Honor, many of these assets derive from my family's business interests. My mother's family founded Westlake Textiles, which was recently restructured following her death. My father, she gestured vaguely in my direction, has been financially dependent on my mother's family wealth his entire life. He never built anything of his own. The words sliced through me despite my preparation. Hearing my own child dismiss my entire life's work, my partnership with Martha, my contributions to the business, our shared dreams, was a wound that cut deeper than any physical pain I'd experienced. In fact, Rachel continued, her voice taking on an affected tremor of concern, we've been supporting my father entirely since my mother passed. His mental condition has been deteriorating, and we've had to take over management of all his affairs. Judge Harmon looked thoughtful. I see. And does your father have any objection to how these assets are being divided? Rachel smiled tightly. He's not a party to these proceedings, Your Honor, and due to his condition, he wouldn't be able to meaningfully participate anyway. Something in the judge's expression shifted. A flicker of discomfort, perhaps, at the casual dismissal of an elderly man sitting right there in her courtroom. She looked directly at me for the first time. Mr. Collins, do you have anything you'd like to say regarding your daughter's characterization of your situation? Rachel's head whipped around, alarm flashing across her features before she could compose them. Your Honor, my father isn't prepared to address the court. He gets confused easily and— I'd like to speak, Your Honor, I said, rising slowly to my feet. My voice, stronger and clearer than it had been in months, seemed to surprise everyone in the room, Rachel most of all. Dad, she hissed, sit down. You don't understand what's happening here. Judge Harmon frowned. Miss Collins, your father has a right to be heard. Please approach the bench, Mr. Collins. I walked forward, feeling Rachel's glare burning into my back. My heart hammered in my chest, but my resolve was iron. This was for Martha, for our life together, for the truth. Standing before the judge, I withdrew the flash drive from my pocket and placed it on the bench. Your Honor, I have evidence that may be relevant to these proceedings. This contains security footage from my home, along with documentation of financial transactions that occurred without my knowledge or consent. The courtroom fell silent. I could practically feel the tension radiating from Rachel and Cole. What sort of documentation? Judge Harmon asked. Her interest clearly piqued. Footage of my daughter and son-in-law removing financial documents from my home office. Records of transfers from accounts they removed my name from. Evidence of forged signatures on company transfer documents. I paused, then added the final blow. And a video recording where they explicitly discuss how I will die without knowing the will isn't even mine anymore. There was an audible gasp from someone in the gallery. Cole's attorney leaped to his feet. Your Honor, this is completely irrelevant to today's proceedings. Mr. Collins is clearly confused, and I am not confused, I said firmly, turning to face the courtroom. I have been systematically isolated, manipulated, and defrauded by my daughter and her husband. They have taken control of my finances, forged my signature on legal documents, and transferred ownership of business interests that rightfully belonged to me after my wife's death. Judge Harmon studied me carefully, likely looking for signs of the confusion and dementia Rachel had claimed. Finding none, she addressed the court clerk. Please connect this drive to the court computer. I'd like to review its contents. The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life as the judge reviewed selected files from my evidence collection. Rachel sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of controlled panic. Cole whispered furiously with his attorney. When Judge Harmon finally looked up, her expression was grave. I've seen enough to determine that these proceedings need to be suspended immediately. Mr. Collins has presented evidence that suggests serious financial impropriety that may constitute elder abuse and fraud. She turned to her clerk. Please contact the district attorney's office. I want a representative here within the hour. Rachel shot to her feet. Your Honor, my father is not well. He's been imagining conspiracies for months. We have medical documentation from doctors you selected and controlled his access to. I interjected quietly, just like you controlled everything else. Judge Harmon banged her gavel. That's enough, Miss Collins. This court is in recess pending the arrival of the district attorney. Mr. Collins, please remain in the courthouse. Bailiff, ensure that no one removes any documents from this courtroom. As the judge exited, Rachel turned to me, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "What have you done?" she hissed. I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing familiar features, and felt a profound sadness beneath my determination. "I've told the truth," I said simply. "Something your mother always valued above all else." The courthouse cafeteria was nearly empty when Assistant District Attorney Marion Reeves sat down across from me, placing a manila folder on the scratched Formica table between us. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance. "Mr. Collins," she began, her voice measured and professional, "I've reviewed the material you provided to Judge Harmon. I'd like to ask you some questions, if that's all right." I nodded, wrapping my weathered hands around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. "Of course." "How long have you been gathering this evidence?" she asked, opening the folder to reveal screenshots from my security footage, neatly labeled with dates and times. "Since shortly after my wife's death," I replied. Martha always had concerns about Rachel's ambitions. When things started disappearing, documents, access to accounts, I felt I needed some insurance. She nodded, making a note on her legal pad. "And the security system. Your daughter and son-in-law were unaware of its continued operation. They assumed it was obsolete after the renovations they did to the house." I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "They overlooked a lot of things about me." Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the cafeteria entrance. Rachel burst in, followed closely by a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit whom I recognized as James Whitford, one of the most prominent attorneys in Bedford Falls. "There he is," Rachel announced loudly, pointing at me as if I were a fugitive. "I wanted on record that my father is being manipulated and is not of sound mind." Ada Reeves stood, her posture straightening defensively. "Miss Collins, this is an informal interview. If you'd like to make statements, you can do so through proper channels." Whitford stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Rachel's arm. "Marion," he said, addressing the ADA with familiar ease, "my client has serious concerns about her father's welfare and the validity of these accusations." Rachel pulled away from her attorney, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "He's been acting erratically for months," she insisted, her voice rising. "Hiding in the basement, muttering to himself, corrupting my stepdaughter with his paranoid fantasies." I remained seated, watching my daughter unravel before my eyes. This woman, with her tailored suit and perfect hair, seemed so far removed from the little girl who once sat on my lap while I read her bedtime stories. What had happened to us? When had money and control become more important than family? "Rachel," I said quietly, "you know that's not true." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed in the nearly empty cafeteria. "See, he's delusional. He actually believes he's been wronged, when we've done nothing but care for him since Mom died." Ada Reeves interjected firmly. "Miss Collins, your father's evidence includes video footage of you explicitly discussing how to divert his assets and falsify his signature. These are serious allegations supported by compelling documentation." "Doctored," Rachel spat. "He's always been good with electronics. Mom used to joke that he loved his gadgets more than people." The memory stung. Martha had indeed teased me about my fondness for technology, but always with affection, not the contempt that dripped from Rachel's retelling. Whitford placed a thick document on the table. "We've prepared a psychiatric evaluation request. My client believes her father requires immediate medical intervention for delusional paranoia and dementia." I felt a chill creep up my spine. This was their countermove, not to address the evidence but to discredit its source. Me. "That won't be necessary," came a new voice from the doorway. We all turned to see Judge Harmon standing there, flanked by a court officer and, to my immense surprise, Abby. The girl looked pale but determined, clutching a familiar-looking notebook to her chest. "Your Honor," Whitford began smoothly, "with all due respect, this is now a family matter requiring medical—" "Mr. Whitford," the judge cut him off firmly. "The evidence presented by Mr. Collins has been corroborated by an independent witness." She gestured to Abby. "This young lady has provided additional documentation that supports Mr. Collins's claims." Rachel's face contorted with fury as she turned to her stepdaughter. "You little traitor! After everything we've done for you." "Like what?" Abby asked quietly, meeting Rachel's gaze without flinching. "Locking me in my room? Taking my phone? Telling me I was just like my failure mother?" She stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "I kept a journal of everything. Dates, times, conversations I overheard. The combination to the safe where you keep the documents with the forged signatures, the offshore account numbers I saw on Dad's computer. The color drained from Rachel's face. Beside her, Whitford shifted uncomfortably. The court has appointed a guardian ad litem for Abigail, Judge Harmon explained, given the obvious conflict of interest. And I've issued an emergency order freezing all assets connected to Westlake Textiles and the Collins family trusts pending further investigation. The next morning, the local newspaper ran the story on its front page. Elderly widower unmasks family fraud ring with secret recordings. The article detailed how I had meticulously documented the systematic theft of my assets through hidden cameras and careful record-keeping. It quoted court officials calling it one of the most comprehensive cases of elder financial abuse they'd ever encountered. By afternoon, the story had been picked up by regional news stations. By evening, a producer from a national news magazine had left 3 messages on my temporary phone. Bedford Falls buzzed with the scandal, the respectable Collins family exposed as fraudsters who had preyed on one of their own. I sat in a hotel room provided by Adult Protective Services, watching the coverage with a numb sense of detachment. This public exposure hadn't been my goal. I had only wanted justice. For Martha, for myself, for the life we had built together. Now, strangers were poring over the intimate details of my family's betrayal, turning my private pain into public entertainment. Rachel appeared on the local evening news the next day, standing beside Whitford on the courthouse steps. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady as she faced the cameras. My father has been struggling with cognitive decline since my mother's passing, she declared, her expression a perfect mask of filial concern. These fabricated accusations stem from a disturbed mind that can no longer distinguish between reality and paranoid fantasy. We only ever acted in his best interest and were devastated that he's been manipulated into these beliefs. The reporter thrust a microphone closer. What about the video evidence? The court has confirmed its authenticity. Rachel's composure slipped momentarily before Whitford stepped in. Selective editing can distort context. We're conducting our own forensic analysis of the material. Later that week, as the investigation deepened, Rachel tried a new tactic. She appeared on a morning talk show, dabbing at tears as she recounted how I had become increasingly dangerous after Martha died. He installed cameras everywhere, she said tremulously. He hid in the basement watching us for hours. He recruited my 14-year-old stepdaughter as his spy. Is this the behavior of a mentally sound person? The host nodded sympathetically. And you were afraid to confront him about this? Terrified, Rachel whispered. We just wanted to protect him from himself. I watched the performance from my temporary apartment, provided by the Victim Services Division while the case proceeded. The painting of me as dangerous, a sinister old man corrupting a teenage girl, was a clever pivot. If they couldn't deny the evidence, they would question the methods used to obtain it. But Rachel hadn't counted on Abby. The girl appeared at the district attorney's office with her mother, Cole's first wife, Catherine, who had fought for emergency custody when the scandal broke. With quiet dignity that belied her 14 years, Abby read a statement to the press. Howard Collins is the only person in that house who ever saw me, she said, her voice initially trembling but growing stronger with each word. Rachel and my dad treated him like he was already dead. They took everything from him, his home, his dignity, his voice. And when I tried to help him, they took everything from me too. She looked directly into the cameras. Howard isn't dangerous. He's just a man who refused to disappear when it would have been convenient for them. That afternoon, the judge issued a restraining order preventing Rachel and Cole from approaching either me or Abby. Cole's attorney attempted to challenge Abby's credibility, suggesting she was an emotionally troubled teenager seeking attention, but her detailed notes, including dates, account numbers, and verbatim conversations, proved impossible to dismiss. As I sat in the district attorney's office reviewing financial records they had subpoenaed, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness. The evidence was damning. Systematic siphoning of funds from my accounts, transfer of company shares through forged documents, even attempts to modify Martha's original will. My own daughter had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to erase me financially and legally, while maintaining the facade of the dutiful child caring for an aging parent. Mr. Collins, Ada Reeves said gently, closing the file in front of her. The grand jury will almost certainly indict based on this evidence. Are you prepared for what that means? A public trial where your daughter could face significant prison time? I stared out the window at the maple trees lining the courthouse square, the same trees Martha and I had walked past countless times during our life together. Autumn was turning their leaves to flame, a beautiful transformation born from the death of the growing season. I didn't want any of this, I said finally. I just wanted what was rightfully mine, what Martha intended me to have. The ADA nodded sympathetically. I understand, but what they did goes beyond civil disputes. This was calculated criminal fraud and elder abuse. I turned back to her, suddenly feeling every one of my 70 years. She's still my daughter. Today my world consists of 1,200 square feet in Mapleton, a quiet town 3 states away from the courthouse where my life unraveled 6 months ago. The small bungalow has just enough room for the essentials, a comfortable recliner that reminds me of the one Martha and I bought when we were first married, a kitchen where I've rediscovered the simple joy of cooking for myself, and a spare bedroom that waits hopefully for visitors who may never come. I sit on my front porch most mornings, watching the neighborhood wake up. The retired mail carrier across the street who walks her corgi at precisely 7:15 a.m. The young couple next door who leave for work in matching scrubs, travel mugs in hand. None of them know my story. Here, I'm just Howard, the quiet widower who moved in last winter, not the man whose family scandal made headlines for weeks, whose daughter's mugshot appeared on the evening news. The criminal trial concluded with a plea deal. Rachel avoided jail time, but received 5 years of probation, significant community service, and was barred from financial management positions. Cole wasn't so fortunate. His prior financial dealings, exposed during the investigation, revealed a pattern of fraud that resulted in an 18-month sentence. Vernon, my brother-in-law, fled to the Cayman Islands before he could be indicted. The authorities are still looking for him. The civil case restored my financial control and recovered most of what had been taken, though some assets had already been liquidated beyond recovery. Martha's family business has been restructured, with a professional management team overseeing operations while I maintain majority ownership. It's ironic. I never cared much about controlling the company, yet fought so hard to keep what was rightfully mine. I unpacked the last box from my old life today, a task I've postponed for months. Inside are the few personal items I wanted to keep. Martha's favorite blue cardigan that somehow still carries a trace of her perfume, the leather-bound photo album chronicling our 42 years together, a smooth river stone from our trip to Yellowstone, engraved with our initials by a local craftsman, and, buried beneath tissue paper, a single flash drive, the last copy of 20 years of surveillance footage. My hands tremble slightly as I hold it, this small rectangular piece of plastic that contains the evidence of betrayal, the documentation of systematic erasure. I've kept it, though all the legal proceedings are finished, though justice, such as it was, has been served. Perhaps it's insurance against future gaslighting, or perhaps it's simply the habit of a man who learned too late that protection requires proof. The doorbell interrupts my thoughts. Through the window, I see a taxi idling in my driveway, and my heart skips a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I open the door, Abby stands there, a duffel bag at her feet and uncertainty in her eyes. "I should have called first," she says immediately, "but I was afraid you might say no." She looks older than her 15 years, her face thinner, her eyes carrying a wariness that shouldn't belong to someone so young. But when I extend my arms, she steps into them without hesitation, and for a moment we're just two survivors holding on to each other. Inside, she sits at my kitchen table while I make hot chocolate, a peace offering, a gesture of normalcy in our decidedly abnormal shared history. "Mom said I could stay for spring break," she explains, wrapping her hands around the steaming mug. "If that's okay with you." Catherine, Cole's first wife and Abby's mother, had reached out shortly after the trial. Unlike Rachel, she had seen the security footage and read her daughter's journal. "You were the only one who protected her," she had said during that first difficult phone call, when her own father wouldn't. "Of course it's okay," I tell Abby now. "The spare room is yours whenever you want it." She notices the flash drive on the counter where I left it. "Is that—" I nod. "The last copy. Are you ever going to watch it again?" she asks, quietly. The question makes me pause. Would revisiting those recordings serve any purpose now? They captured the worst moments, the betrayals, the lies, the slow dismantling of my life. But they also documented something else: resilience, the refusal to disappear. "I don't think so," I say finally. but I'm not ready to destroy it either. Abby seems to understand. She reaches into her bag and pulls out a familiar notebook, the one where she documented the conspiracy against me. I brought this. I thought maybe we could, I don't know, have some kind of ceremony to put it behind us. The suggestion brings unexpected tears to my eyes. This girl, who had been collateral damage in a war she never started, is offering us both a path toward healing. That evening, we sit on my back patio beside a small fire pit. One by one, we feed the pages of her notebook to the flames, watching as the detailed chronicle of betrayal curls and blackens, and finally disintegrates into ash. When the last page is gone, Abby looks at me expectantly. The flash drive feels heavy in my palm. 20 years of footage, evidence, insurance. You don't have to, she says gently. I stare at the small rectangle, thinking of Rachel's words in the courtroom that day. You were nothing without Mom's family money. Those words had cut deeper than any knife, had exposed the fear I'd carried throughout my marriage to Martha, that I wasn't enough, that I hadn't earned my place in her world. But Martha never made me feel that way, not once in 42 years. It was Rachel's narrative, not ours. With sudden clarity, I tossed the flash drive into the flames. The plastic casing bubbles and warps, the metal contacts glowing briefly before surrendering to the heat. It's done, I say, and the words feel like releasing a breath I've been holding for years. Later that night, as Abby sleeps in the spare room, I sit at my small desk and write a letter I've been composing in my head for months. Dear Rachel, by the time you read this, I will have destroyed the last copy of the security footage. Not for your sake, but for mine. I'm choosing to stop being defined by betrayal. Your mother once told me that forgiveness isn't about excusing actions, but about refusing to let bitterness consume you. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to find my way toward that wisdom. What you said in the courtroom, that I was nothing without your mother's money, has haunted me. Perhaps there was a time I feared that was true, but I know now that wealth never defined what Martha and I built together. I loved you from the moment you were born. That hasn't changed even if everything else has. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, you know where to find me. Dad. I seal the envelope but don't address it yet. Some wounds need more time to heal, both hers and mine. The next morning, Abby and I plant a cherry tree in the backyard. Grandma loved cherry blossoms, she reminds me as we pat down the soil around the slender trunk. She did, I agree, surprised and touched that Abby remembers this detail about a woman she barely knew. They reminded her of new beginnings. As we stand back to admire our work, I realize something profound. This small house in a new town isn't an ending forced upon me by circumstances. It's a beginning I've chosen for myself. I think of the final act before leaving my old house, disconnecting the last security camera that had watched over our lives for 20 years. I'd left a letter there, tucked into the empty mounting bracket. For anyone who wants to know what truth costs, just press play. But the truth is, I no longer need to press play. I no longer need to review the evidence or justify my experience. I know what happened. I survived it. And now, finally, I'm living beyond it. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound. When those we love most become the architects of our suffering, the pain transcends the physical and financial. It reaches into the very core of who we are. Howard's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of self-respect isn't in fighting back immediately, but in gathering the truth patiently and methodically until the moment is right. What would you have done in Howard's position? Would you have confronted your family at the first sign of betrayal? Or would you have done as he did, watching, waiting, documenting, knowing that accusations without evidence are easily dismissed, especially when coming from someone society has already begun to overlook? Sometimes wisdom looks like patience, and sometimes courage wears the disguise of apparent submission. The most profound lesson from Howard's journey isn't about the technology that saved him or even the justice that was eventually served. It's about his final act of discarding the evidence, choosing to define himself not by the betrayal he suffered, but by his capacity to move forward. True freedom isn't about punishment or vindication. It's about reclaiming your story and writing your own ending. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful human experiences to light. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Would you have had the strength to destroy that final flash drive? Until next time, remember, your story isn't over until you decide it is.